welcome to the debate, which is will robots run and rule procurement? Now we're in Whitehall. A number of us, me included, spent much of our career in procurement in Whitehall, and I can tell you it is alive with robots. So those of you who are speaking on that motion, you should do very well. Let me tell you a little bit about the format. The first speaker will propose the motion, which will then be opposed. The third speaker supports the motion, and the fourth and the final opposes. Have you got all that?
Yeah.
I will ask questions on it later, and Peter will tell you something about that. Each speaker is limited to 8 minutes maximum, unless they bribe me in beer. And at the end of the 4 speeches, there will be questions. We will have a final vote by 7 p.m. However, as you know, here in the UK, we've had a couple of votes over the past year or so, and they've all been pretty shit, if you want my opinion. And we have an American speaker here, and yours haven't been that much better. Now, the exit polls are in. They're not very good either, are they? Our first speaker to propose the motion is my elder brother, Peter. He's approaching his 75th birthday, so let's be kind to him. And he is proposing the motion, this House believes that robots will run and rule procurement by 2020. Peter, as most of you know, is the managing editor of Spend Matters UK. He is an ex-procurement director, very ex, and a past president of SIPS, as indeed almost everyone is here. So Peter, Mr. Smith, he has promised, by the way, to do the robot a la Peter Crouch as he comes in.
Good evening, and I am delighted to be here. No, that's enough of that as well, really, isn't it? So I'm proposing the motion that the robots will run and rule the procurement world by 2020. And if you're wondering why I'm speaking on that side of the debate, it's because if the robots win, I want them to know I was on their side and spare me from the horrific death that the rest of you will face. So I was going to speak about creatures that are incredibly clever, but lack all interpersonal sensitivity. Well, that's enough about Jason Bush. Let me talk about robots. So, serious stuff. Oxford University and Deloitte did some research recently looking at the jobs most likely to be lost to the robots. And the probability of buyer and procurement officer jobs going was 64%, which is very similar to vehicle technicians and shelf fillers. So that's where procurement officers stand. The figure was only 59% probability when you came to procurement directors and managers. So in both cases, we're nearer the going than the staying, basically. And to keep your job, you need to either be in a caring role where empathy is very important, or jobs with creativity and originality, or jobs with social intelligence and strategic decisions. So does that sound like most procurement jobs? I'll leave it to you to decide that. Now, of course, it won't be a single robot taking over our jobs. It will be a combination of artificial intelligence, machine learning, AI, automated systems. So I'm going to call that or it Alex for short. Nice gender-neutral name, just so I don't have to keep saying robots. So I'm going to quickly look at some different sorts of procurement. If we start with manufacturing procurement, so there's some human input in the design of something new that's being made. But from that point on, well, Alex can determine the best materials for the manufacture. Alex can find the best suppliers. Alex can put out a tender and analyse the results and look at the TripAdvisor rating for those suppliers and make a decision about who are the best companies. Then when we come to the whole process of supply chain, scheduling, logistics, what we used to call progress chasing in the old days, well, you can see how that's very, very easily automated. No trouble at all. Purchase to pay, well, we've done it. We've pretty much automated the purchase to pay cycle already. So there's no argument about that, I don't think. 100% electronic invoicing, supply chain finance. So that's taken care of traditional manufacturing procurement. That's gone. Alex is doing that. Okay. Now we've got the one-offs and the tail spend. Well, procurement has already decided that we don't want to do that. We've spent the last 10 years trying to find ways of getting rid of tail spend. And if you look at, say, SAP Ariba's spot buy product and the link up with Mercatio, that's all about getting work out of procurement and say, well, we don't want to do this, we can automate all this. So that's gone as well. So I know these people on the other side of the debate are going to say, but what about complex services procurement? What about the sexy, difficult marketing services, professional services, and so on, the high value? Because they're complex and they require human interaction. And I wouldn't disagree with that. However, the problem is here that Alex has an ally, or lots of allies. Do you know who they are? Our stakeholders, the budget holders. Because when we're working in marketing and professional services, it's not our budget. It's a CMO or somebody else. So it won't be just the robots that beat us, it'll be the stakeholders as well. So why did we get involved with these complex service categories in the first place? In many organisations, it was because the board was worried about loss of control. So procurement got involved because dodgy things were happening or whatever. Well, with technology, we can get that control. We can have, again, automated approvals, we can have real-time spend analysis, lots of tools to make sure that the CFO and the CEO do know what's happening in that sort of area. Or it might be procurement inserted ourselves by saying, well, we can be useful by researching the market, doing some of the legwork for you. Well, again, Alex can do that. I want to find 10 management consulting firms who can do this sort of work and have a good track record. That can be automated very easily. So our budget holder, let's call him Robin, because that's another nice mutual name, wants to engage a supplier of some sort. Well, Robin can work with Alex to find the suppliers, put a structured process in place, just like manufacturing items, get proposals, maybe even go back to the suppliers and say, your price is 50% too expensive, please reduce it. And you know, ultimately, it's Robin, it's the budget holder, it's the CMO who's going to have the judgment and make the key decision about who the supplier is and how they work with them. And procurement is frankly redundant. Now, I confess, I don't think the robots winning this battle is inevitable. I think there are possible scenarios where we can see procurement surviving. But that requires us to look very hard at what we do and our role. And I'm not convinced that the profession is taking on that challenge at the moment. I heard an excellent speech the other week from Jerry Priest, who's an ex-P&G head of marketing services procurement. And really good speech. But one of his key things was he thinks the procurement people in marketing services increasingly are going to the marketing director and demanding, saying, we want to work for you. We don't want to work for procurement because procurement hasn't supported us. Procurement is still focused on savings and cost reduction, which in a category like marketing is rubbish. It's totally irrelevant. So we want to come and work for you and be called the marketing investment manager because marketing spend is investment. And I think that's still true in an awful lot of companies. So I'm not sure that procurement has the appetite or the self-awareness or the skills to fight off Alex. If you take the view of automation in direct spend, end-user delegation, systemization for the one-off and low-value stuff, and the key users excluding us with the help of Alex, then what's left for procurement? So ladies and gentlemen, I suggest and I support the motion that the robots will indeed be running and ruling procurement in 2020. Thank you.
A modest but very welcoming ripple of support for this. Replying to Peter and the Transformers, we have all the way from the USA, Mr. Jason Bush. Jason is the founder of Spend Members and one of the best known experts. What did I say? Bloody robot. He's one of the best known experts on procurement technology in the world. Jason, of course, is from the USA. And in keeping with his great president, he sent his son, Jason Bush Jr., to have a few words about getting a lowdown on his opposition. I told him everything about Peter Smith. That took 20 seconds. So, opposing the motion, you're welcome to the floor, Mr. Jason Bush.
Thank you, Mr. I'd like to raise a glass before we begin to the fact that we only saw Peter dance for 3 seconds. Thank you, Mr. Barons. So I am speaking against the robots. When I think of robots, what comes to mind? For me, it's the good guys. Robots, after all, can do no harm. It's Michael Jackson in the movie Moonwalker. You know, when the junior member of the Jackson 5 transforms into a robot and goes on a rampage, kills the bad guys. May he rest in peace. But robots are not all good. Continuing on the movie analogies, here are some examples of bad robots that come to mind. Who can forget Hal in A Space Odyssey? Imagine Hal as buyer. I was somewhat partial to Vanessa Kensington in Austin Powers until she took off her human mask, but I'll leave it at that. And who can forget Otto from WALL-E, probably the best example of gently trained artificial intelligence gone wrong. Finally, I would be completely remiss, given the venue, if I did not mention the androids in The World's End, a movie as metaphor for the death of the independent pub and real ale in this wonderful country, at least the way I read into it. But now let me tie this back around to the motion. This House believes that robots will run and roll procurement by 2020. I believe that the general direction of this argument is not in and of itself wrong, but there are a number of flaws in the nuance of how the motion has been proposed, and we are, after all, asking you to judge the merits of the proposal on its own as it stands. So let me present you with 3 arguments against it. I'll outline these now and then describe them in a bit more detail, hopefully not too much. First, I've got a serious issue with the timing. 2020 is not happening. Second, strategic procurement is not purchasing. And third, robots lack empathy. Let me touch on each of these. So first, the issue with the timing. Artificial intelligence, the central component of robotics as we define it, is not ready for prime time today outside of highly targeted applications. I live in this world, and please trust me on it. Let me give you some examples. In spend analysis today, 95% of the deployments in the market still rely on rules-based approaches to cleansing and classification. And generally, they work. And even AI-based models still require humans behind the scenes, not only to train the system, but to do QA on it. Second, AI simply doesn't exist in procure to pay yet, regardless of what Mr. Smith said. We've been shown demonstrations of AI by more than one vendor at Spend Matters, but it didn't work in practice as planned. No harm, it's beta, but when you ask for supplier guidance in one area, and Siri says, "Let me think about that," you quickly lose your audience in a demo. And third, look at those scrambling to truly embed robotic process automation. It's those firms that have already chased labor cost arbitrage as far as they can, offshore BPOs. True AI and robotics will be a tech play by firms like SAP, who've got a technology backbone. It won't be a last-ditch margin-preserving effort for services-oriented firms. Let me share with you a quick chart that I'm happy to zip along to prove the point. I'm sorry to rely on PowerPoint as a crutch.
No PowerPoint allowed.
Former consultant, alert.
Mr. Chairman.
This is the problem with robotics. I'm doing the hand touch identification. It's failing.
He's taking his own time up doing this.
I think that's enough visual aid. So I will zip this along to anyone. Somebody far smarter than me on my team literally has analyzed the AI market within procurement today. Where are we? Early spend analysis, 5% of the market. All this other stuff, which is super exciting, simply isn't there. So again, think about the motion, 2020. It's going to happen, but not in the next few years. Okay, enough of PowerPoint. Second, strategic procurement is not purchasing. Transactional purchasing can and should be automated to the greatest degree possible, and it already has. Multi-way matches in P2P to avoid unnecessary paper, guided buying approaches in e-procurement that cut out buyers from the process, make shopping easier, and of course, the overall digitization of all sorts of back office functions such as AP. People are bad when they touch these areas, but even here, we're not talking about robots. We're talking about basic cloud procurement apps 101. This stuff has been around for 10 years. Now my final argument, robots lack empathy, and strategic procurement is about putting yourself in the shoes of everyone else in the business and within our supply chains. Here are some examples. Do you think that a robot, even in the next decade, will be able to convince the business to work with a secondary key potential supplier who did poorly on supplier performance data from 10 years ago? Do you think a robot could get an internal working group together or consortia of like companies to agree on data collection and validation standards for GDPR? Can a robot charm a CMO to consider a new approach to bidding out and managing agencies of record? Can a robot agree on what savings should count with finance? These are just some examples. And I would urge you to think about, can we replace these with computers at this point in time? I don't believe we can. So finally, in closing, please consider the first gentleman making the argument in favor of robots. he had to resort to music and dance to win your affection. Robots, true robots, don't understand music, at least not yet. And if they dance, it's based on linear programming, a bit like Mr. Smith. My esteemed Spam Matters colleague is playing a particular human emotion to charm you into voting yay. And please don't feel sorry for his dancing. It's why he went into procurement after all. So please, focus on the reality of where robotic process automation is today and the scope of the argument. On a timeline perspective, 2020 is not realistic. And on a scope perspective, robots will not have the empathy to support broader procurement outside of transactional buying in this time frame. And finally, the kit is simply not ready for prime time. It will be, but it's not there yet. So thank you for the time, and let us raise a glass not only against the motion, but against Mr. Smith's 2 left feet.
So we're at half time in the big debate. Is your support going to the grey-haired, dark-suited led team, or to the dark-haired, grey-suited team? I'll let you mull over that one. Supporting Peter, because someone has to, we have James Marlin from SAP Ariba. James is Vice President of Network Growth at SAP Ariba and has had a long and successful career across various firms in the procurement technology space. I understand you're not dancing tonight, James, is that right?
That's correct.
But he could be persuaded by a good round of applause. James.
Yeah, fortunately not good enough round of applause. Well, thanks very much for coming along today, and I'm here to propose the motion about robotics taking over by 2020. Whenever I look at things like this, I always sort of go back in history to look at what might happen next. Edmund Burke had the quote, "Those who don't study history are destined to repeat it." So I got hold of the oldest procurement book ever written, which I got a reprint of, and it's dated 1887 on the procurement of railway supplies. Which is fascinating to see the birth of procurement and how so many of the things that we wrestle with today were a problem if you were a purchasing manager in 1887. It talks about shrewd purchasing agent will constantly supplement his knowledge, employer can save money and so on. I like this one here. Will supplement his knowledge of affairs by intercourse with those who have practical knowledge of the use of the wares he buys. So some things really haven't changed. I think that's a little early definition of the word intercourse. But what's interesting about this is we haven't really moved on very much as a profession in just over 100 years. And so this is where I dispute with what Jason said, is that strategic procurement are 6 people, that's not purchasing. Actually, when you look at the jobs market, that's a very small part of it. And when I go out to visit companies, I was in South Africa last week, and there, purchasing is all about basic procure-to-pay stuff. People receiving orders, typing them in, matching, calling up suppliers, responding to payment requests. That's where most of the jobs are, certainly globally. Now maybe in certain highly specialized areas there are a few high-end places, but look at the total aggregate jobs in what we would call purchasing, they are like that. So I think the idea that there's all these clever things that we need to do, I dispute that. I also looked at the history of the Luddites, right? We've heard of the Luddites? Actually, those guys were kind of interesting. Not what you think. They were not against the technology. They were against the social changes of the technology and the fact that the spoils of the technology would be unequally distributed in society. And in fact, they were put down by the king's men. But the things have changed a lot since then, and now the way we respond to technology, we have a very different way of thinking about technology. So I spoke to my daughters. I was yesterday at my daughter's graduation ceremony, University of Nottingham, well done Victoria, 2-1 in psychology. And you have to sit through all these guys, right? And physics, okay, well done, psychology, and there's hundreds and hundreds of them. I like the fact the lady at the end, whose name was Zamboni, she was obviously the last. Emma gave her the biggest cheer. Oh, she's the last one. Good for you, love. Got up here. But I looked at the list of graduates from the business school, and I looked how many were from procurement. Guess how many? No, of course not. Right? We like to say how professional we are, and there are all these business students who do finance, those who do manufacturing, there was 3D printing, all these specialised things. Nobody graduates from University of Procurement. We're not as professional as we like to think. And so there's this huge range of jobs that really are up for disruption. So, so as a profession, we haven't really moved on that much. I've been in this game for just over 20 years. Did my first procurement demonstration in 1997. And you know what we showed? We showed approval rules. We showed matching. We showed looking up invoices. In 20 years, I did the same demo literally 2 weeks ago. Right? So as a profession, we haven't moved on. Right? We're still doing that stuff. The late David Noble of SIPS, he used to talk about the inflection point of procurement and how it's happening right now. And he had his graph, which had a sort of a high point and then a high watermark and then a decreasing influence of procurement. And I talk about the difference between the age of mandate and the age of guidance. And we're at that inflection point right now. We are still in the age of mandate as procurement. We tell people what to do. We say do this, don't do that. This approve supplier, yes, no. And a lot of approval rules and supplier lists. And you know, when you get to a change in ages, that's like the age of the dinosaurs, right? So when there's a change between the Cretaceous period and the Tertiary period, that's when the dinosaurs died out, right? So I think that will be the case for a large number of procurement jobs. We are dinosaurs in this profession. I've been here for 20 years. I've invested a lot of my career in this, and I believe that the vast majority of jobs have not moved on much since 1887. The last point is about empathy. Oh, machines. They can never be empathetic. You know what? I spoke to my daughters about that this morning at breakfast, and they came up with the following ideas. So first of all, both my daughters, they're 21 and 19, so classic millennials, they would absolutely prefer to speak to a machine than to speak to a human being. Right? No doubt about it. They use the train line to book their trains, they use Expedia to book their airfares. They hate calling the bank on a call centre. They have me do it. She's 21, she's a Bachelor of Science as of yesterday, and I have to call the bank on her behalf because she doesn't like speaking to people. Other examples I have, we trust Google more than governments these days, right? We trust, we all have our favourite applications. I was in Estonia. Oh, that's a good one. Earlier on this week, like that, Estonia. Who knows Estonian? Yeah, exactly. If you know a bit of Finnish and a bit of Hungarian in good shape, well, that's great. So I use the application of Google where you hold the phone up to the menu and it translates for you. And that's the ability of artificial intelligence is far stronger than we are, and we old farts don't see it. But my kids think that's perfectly ordinary that happens. Another example, we're sitting there, airplane goes over, picks up a phone and says, "Oh yeah, Dad, that's the flight from London to Abu Dhabi." It left just by holding the phone up to an airplane in the sky. I get to her, no big deal. And I'm trying to think, what techs are involved in doing that? Well, I think where you are, that the angle of the phone, because possibly there's a compass, and then you somehow log into the air traffic control database. What? You do that? And then link that to the British Airways? Yeah. And my daughter, no big deal. Pick up the phone. I know where that plane's going. So I think we need to listen to our children, if you're my age, right? Or listen to the millennials in your organization, because they have a completely different view of technology. And this idea of empathy, they trust machines more than people. So I'd like to wrap up really in the to continue to propose this motion that procurement, we haven't moved on much, not in my 20-year career. And the vast majority of jobs are still old-fashioned, paper-pushing stuff that's right for procurement. And finally, speak to your kids. Robots, they do have empathy. It's us parents who don't. I agree.
That was passionate, wasn't it? I was on your side with that. You did mention Google and government in one phrase there. Government spend taxes that Google don't contribute to. That's quite an interesting sort of phrase. So, finally, speaking against the robots, we have Mayank Chandler from IBM, and you'll all know that you never get sacked for supporting someone from IBM. His career spans procurement technology advice, implementation and operation at a very reasonable daily rate, I hear. So, final speaker before you go into your deliberations. Over to you.
Hi, good evening everyone. Hope you've been enjoying the debate so far. James, I thought you were also speaking against the motion, and I thought you were helping me out actually. Thank you. Procurement hasn't moved on much, really, and that's probably the point. I think, Jason, you were trying to elaborate, and Jason literally stole all my thoughts, so I have got nothing, but I'm going to just speak with all the thoughts that are running in my mind, where we are. As a profession, I do sell cognitive procurement, and I am all in for automation, but I think they have a space with us, but they are not going to replace us. So let me start with something very simple. I think the future is right here, but it's unevenly distributed. You spoke about your daughter or your granddaughter, they're more used to the machines than because I know one graduated. So sorry. So you know, yeah, daughter. So yeah, we do see bots around. We do see scripts and other stuff around. But we also see very basic stuff. We do paper-based procurement. And in some cases, like the book which you had, thank you for that. In 100 years or so, we haven't really moved on. We're still trying to teach people the basics of procurement, and even in some companies, procurement does not exist as a function. So we have a long way to go. So I want to position my debate on two things. One, where artificial intelligence is today and what it needs to be truly like the trusted advisor or to replace us. The prime time is not now, so I again agree with Jason. It's not 2020 is not the right time, but there is a place for it in the future. The other place is, from a reality point of view, where are we with procurement around the world, right? Let's take a look at that. So old habits die hard. Our colleagues in Germany, the German enterprises, 69% of the times they print the e-invoice that comes to them, right? Can you believe it? That's like 35% of the large enterprises, about 73% of the medium and small enterprises, and about 70-something% of the absolutely small enterprises. They print their e-invoice, which is legitimate by the government, right? We look at one of the most advanced countries in the world, USA. The e-commerce there is more than $1 trillion, but the B2B e-commerce penetration is only 10%. Sorry, I meant the B2B commerce is about $1 trillion, but the penetration of that is about 10%. That's where we are today. Our e-sourcing penetration globally in corporates is less than 36%. We are literally using paper-based systems. What are we driving? What are we selling? What does SAP sell? SAP goes and sells to companies, please buy a software that can at least standardize your procurement, standardize your processes, move you away from fragmented processes, move you away from disparate systems, right? But this is very basic level of artificial intelligence. This is the very starting of artificial intelligence. This is saying that we have some basic scripting rules, which has a tactical impact, which is what Jason was talking about. It's very tactical, the impact. The bots are just the next stage of that tactical. They will just probably do some repetitive tasks, but they're not learning. As we move further along the spectrum, and actually I've got apps in my phone which do that. They are our buying assistants. They actually can convert voice to image, or like what Siri does, convert voice to text or image to text, but they are just probably our assistants. They're not replacing us. And then as we move further down the spectrum of artificial intelligence, you get to augmented artificial intelligence, and then you get further down the spectrum to something called as cognitive digital brains. So that is where we are heading, but these systems will need data, and these systems, when they get the right data, they will simply augment our decision making. They will be a trusted advisor. I think we have gone past the stage where we want to just get humans to replace machines to replace humans, but we want them to just augment our decision making. Otherwise, we have examples where they replace us, like the scripting task, like the Excel macros or something. All this is automation, but this is just tactical tasks. The strategic task will always remain with procurement, with machines just being at our disposal and giving us better structured data. So if you look at the problems of the world today, we had traditional analytics, then we moved to big data, then we moved from big data to artificial intelligence or some AI techniques, then we moved to augmented artificial intelligence, and then to these cognitive clouds. So we're still very much in that journey. With Ariba, the best-in-class software procurement provider, which is a suite solution across source to pay, we have less than 30% market share. And that also, if you achieve that, if you get an Ariba system, you get an end-to-end source to pay in one system, but it's very basic. It's not automation. It's not, robots will not run and rule us. So I feel we are very, very far away from that space yet, and they have a role to play, and they will always help us out. And I absolutely believe we should really listen to the millennials. They are more used to touch than to, I'll give you an example of my son, truly my son, no grandson, but the first time he looked at a calculator, he said, that's a mini laptop. Because all he had seen was, you know, a laptop before, but he'd never seen a calculator, right? When he touched the TV the first time, he thought everything will touch like how it does in his iPad. So yes, millennials are of course advanced, and they will probably listen more to machines. And maybe when we have enough data, we will have machines become more empathetic. But I would personally fear that and like the movies, taking the script from the movies, will we ever teach our machines so much that we empower them so much that they actually rule us and not let the humans make decisions? Imagine what the world would be when actually, you know, your door doesn't let you enter inside your house, or your car, you know, goes and bashes into your ex-girlfriend, whatever, you know. Just a bad example, but you know what I'm trying to say. We won't never let machines overtake us. We will just want machines to be our friend and partner. So that's why I stand for the, you know, for Jason, but I totally stand against the motion that robots will run and rule the house. They have a space, but that's about it. I don't know if I'm close to 7 minutes, but thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a big round of applause for our four speakers. So those in favour of the robot motion, as proposed by initially Mr. Smith, if you could put your hands in the air and vigorously shout aye.
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 It's not vigorously really, is it?
Aye.
That was pretty vigorously. Those against the motion, as initially proposed by Jason here, raise your hands in the air and really loudly shout nay. Nay. Now, I'm a bit of a cheat liar, you know, but I think that's pretty convincing. So, here we are, the two gentlemen together who opposed the motion. Let's have a round of applause for Tipping Low. My final words here. Let's have one final round of applause, not only for the four speakers, but for our very generous sponsors here, and for this debate, and for this evening, which I've hugely enjoyed. I hope you have as well. Thank you very much, everybody.